Once again, Penn State has the opportunity to land some big-name wide receivers in the class of 2025, but I don't think anybody should get their hopes up.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Can Marques Hagans actually make up some ground with wide receiver recruiting in the class of 2025 this weekend? This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Brian Smith is back, the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network, and today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn, the leaders in job recruiting. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Brian, Penn State recently offered Jordan Myles, who is the best player in the state of Utah, class of 2025 wide receiver. Koby Howard is coming back to Happy Valley to visit for the Lasch Bash, the only 2025 player, because we don't know actually if Romero Ison, wide receiver commit for USC, is going to be there. He's listed on the Lasch Bash attendees list. He's apparently not supposed to be there, according to other sources. Brian, Marques Hagans, this is kind of what I've said, the last-ditch effort here to gain some ground back in wide receiver recruiting, because they missed out on a lot of priority targets. So now they've gone down the big board. And unless you're going to try to flip anybody in the fall, again, I have to reiterate, this is it to make a statement.
They need to have a good season. We've said that 500 times, but getting kids on campus now to build a relationship is still priority one. Mm-hmm. Penn State going to get Koby back on campus. I'm waiting to hear back from him on what schools he's down to. He's going to make a decision fairly soon. I don't know. He's been all over the world, it seems like, with recruiting, because so many teams have been after him. But I have no idea what's going on with the kid from Maryland, but that kid can run. I remember from seeing his film earlier this year. So whether the USC commit comes or not, that's somebody they should definitely look at. And there's always a chance to flip somebody during the season too, especially if Penn State plays well and throws the ball around.
Yeah, that's fair. From this group, though, between Myles, what we've talked about, Koby Howard at length, and then Ison. Ison kind of comes back into the picture because USC continues to do its due diligence on wide receivers themselves. Ison, who is, yes, USC is in the Big Ten, but I never really felt like Ison was going to stay committed to USC. And then when there was at least the idea that he was going to be attending the Lasch Bash, okay, hey, Marques Hagans is really making a good push here. This was somebody that Penn State valued, closer to home. Yes, USC's in the Big Ten, but come on, that's Maryland all the way to California. That doesn't seem like it's going to stick. And now we're hearing that he's not going to attend the Lasch Bash. Maybe that changes. This episode is being, released a few days ahead of July 27th here. Brian, if Ison doesn't attend the Lasch Bash alongside Koby Howard, I feel like that in itself is a recruiting loss. Especially, even if they don't ultimately land the commitment, I know the result is what everybody cares about, but if they can't even get him to show up for a visit to the Lasch Bash, I think that is a lot more telling than it should be.
The only reason I would push back on that is if he has another engagement. That's possible.
True.
But I obviously have no idea. I don't know the young man. But at the same time, again, the numbers are thin here. Regardless, you put yourself in this position in the first place. That's the bigger problem. And you opened with that. Mm-hmm. It is non-debatable. Penn State to date has not hit the mark at receiver recruiting. Got some good players, but they still needed at least one more be committed by now. And they don't. So anybody they can get on campus that's as good a player as him, I mean, if he doesn't come, you're probably not going to get him. Like there's something going on there. They need to hit an inside straight on one of these guys. Jerome, we'll talk about him in a second.
Yeah.
You can get the kid from Utah. Like that's an instant impact, big time player. I love his film. He can run away from guys. He's over 200 pounds. He's over 6 foot. He can play for anybody. But I'll believe it when I see it from them getting a kid from Utah. Like that's just a very difficult pull. But his recruitment has been all over the map. So, I mean, speaking of, I know he's supposed to be going to Michigan's barbecue this weekend. Michigan's passing offense is not exciting. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because they got a winning culture there right now, but that's where he's supposed to be going. That kind of surprised me because he's got every school in the country after. USC just offered it.
Yeah.
So I thought USC would be, that offense, if you're a receiver, it's got to be pretty exciting. So I get it. But Myles would fit the bill. If they could somehow pull that off, you could kind of forget the other extractions.
Oh, yeah.
Just they got good players in the class, but he would be the bell cow. He's the guy who can come in, compete, make the top 5 or 6 receivers as a freshman possibly. He's a special talent. So Penn State needs a home run with one of these kids.
Myles definitely becomes the new priority. You can hedge your recruiting bets here and still focus on Koby Howard. Again, the goal is to get at least 4. And I don't think anybody should be opposed to 5 wide receivers in this class, but this becomes a lot more unrealistic day by day by day, especially when you missed on Taz Williams, who we're leading for, Lex Cyrus. I don't like bringing it up because it's honestly embarrassing for Penn State to miss on those types of players, on those wide receivers who, again, we talked about the analogy of them going into the fourth quarter with a 21-28 point lead, and they end up losing those commitments elsewhere. NIL, regardless, I just can't understand why, when you have limited numbers as you do, like you said, that Penn State can't get more and more to add here. And then, okay, so we bring up Jerome Myles here out of the state of Utah, one of the best receivers in the class of 2025. Interestingly enough, Brian, Penn State just offered him. USC just offered him. Why is a top 15 wide receiver in the country, consensus, the number 1 player in the state of Utah, and he hasn't been offered by Penn State or USC? And that's where, you kind of have this conflict of interest now. See, where we just brought up how Romero Ison is committed to USC, and I say, hey, by the way, USC is still looking at other options at wide receiver, so it makes sense if you kind of trade one for the other here in Penn State's case. But other than Koby Howard, I don't feel strongly about the other two. I don't think Penn State flips Ison, and I don't, at the end of the day, and I don't think they get Jerome Myles either, especially in this case, he's going to Michigan for their barbecue and not Penn State's.
Myles is a very difficult projection because, let's be honest, the state of Utah produces a lot of linemen and stuff like that, but skill spots, it's not their bag as a general rule. So we don't have a lot of precedent for where kids are going to go, but it's still a Western program. The traditional Pac-12 schools and SC and UCLA usually recruit that state well, besides BYU and Utah, obviously, Washington, Oregon. But his visit list has been bizarre. A&M, Ole Miss, Michigan, just got Southern Cal and Penn State. Projecting where Jerome is going is like saying, I know exactly how hot it's going to be in Florida tomorrow, and it's going to be 40. It's just not realistic. Like, it's never 40 in Florida. But trust me, I've lived there long enough. But the point is still saying, like, you just have to recruit him. His recruitment is wild. He was committed to Ole Miss at one point. A kid from Utah committed to Ole Miss. Now, I know Lane has a really exciting offense, but that culturally, like, that has just got to be bizarre. Just wild. So recruiting in today's age, man, we talked about it a few weeks ago on this show. Penn State had recent commitments from the state of Florida, Texas, and California. The days of looking at a state and kind of having an idea where a kid's going to go is not a lock like it used to be. It's just so much different. And I study those trends a lot. In the last year or so, it has just went wide open. It's almost like NFL free agency with recruiting. And it doesn't even have to be a 5-star kid. Like, if it's a 5-star quarterback, I get it. Yeah. But we're seeing kids that are in the 200s, 300s, that are running backs, more basic positions going across the country more than ever. It's really, really unique.
So it gets interesting here. Like you said, I agree with you wholeheartedly that if Jerome Myles were to commit to Penn State, you can forget all of the other podcasts, all the other conversations that we've had criticizing Penn State, Marques Hagans, wide receiver recruiting in the class of 2025, because he solves all of it. I think he's the equivalent of landing a Quincy Porter in this case. His recruitment has been interesting. Again, why Penn State did not offer him to this point, I don't know how that's going to go over with Myles. Maybe, again, USC just offered him as well. So maybe he's keen on just waiting for the perfect school, or is he going to take that personally? Like, well, why are you offering me now this late? in the cycle, especially after you missed on your other wide receiver recruiting targets. As for the class of 2025, it's still strong. It has the potential to finish in the inside of the top 15. We'll tell you about the class of 2025 more in depth, as well as which prospects stand out at the Lasch Bash. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. It's still summertime and I love going to Major League Baseball games. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And get this, prices on the Gametime app actually go down as it gets closer to first pitch. You get killer last minute deals with Gametime. You can save up to 60% off when you're buying last minute tickets for not only MLB games, but sports in general, music, comedy, theater, and you also get flash deals and zone deals, exclusive deals within the app. You get all-in pricing so you can see the upfront cost and no surprise fees. And probably the best feature, you get a panoramic view of the seats. So if you've never been to a venue before, you actually get to see what your point of view would look like before you get to the event. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. There are tons of intriguing prospects in this class of 2025. So just because they struggle with the wide receiver position in this cycle when there is a need doesn't mean that they haven't been accomplishing a lot of other goals in this cycle. I mean, Darius Dixon out of the state of California is the headliner. He rivals 24/7 on 3, all have him ranked at the top as Penn State's best overall prospect. And then when you start to look through the class a little bit, there's a difference in rankings. For example, Jabri Wallace-Coleman is kind of all over the place. Some sites have him really rated well. Others say, hey, we still need to see more from him. But this class, you got your 3 running backs, at least for the time being, right? Well, the jury's still out as if they'll be able to retain all of them. You rebuilt your defensive backfield. You got all your cornerbacks, you got all your safeties, and then you got versatility at the edge rusher / linebacker position. Brian, any of these guys, really any of them, Max Granville, Jaden Woods, LeVar Arrington, Cortez Harris, all of these guys can either be an off-ball linebacker, Deshaun Burnett as well, or they could be a defensive end where they put their hand in the dirt and rush purely after the quarterback. The same mold and the same timeline as Abdul Carter. They basically recruited 4 or 5 different Abdul Carter types of that. They have the versatility to play defensive end, or they can be that free roaming game wrecking linebacker.
I kind of went through it, and I mentioned this to you before we came on. Like, there's a lot of good options here. If I had to just take one, it'd be Woods. He's a little bigger. I think he's outgrown linebacker. Well, he's already 240-ish. He'll play with his hand in the dirt unless he plays in a 3-4 in the NFL or something. That's a different animal. But in college, at Penn State, if they, as long as they stick with a 4-3, he's the pure edge guy that gives you havoc. The Penn State's had some really good ones in the last 10, 15 years. And I think he could play pretty early. It's just wild that he's from Shawnee, Kansas, not that far from Kansas City, but that area has been better lately. Penn State, again, their recruiting is just so much different than it's used to be. They didn't ever recruit Kansas when I was growing up, but they're getting one of the best players in the country from Kansas. So, again, recruiting is not about where you're from. It's just who recruits you and where you want to go.
And what's interesting about Woods specifically, I recently watched, it was a scouting report of some of the prospects that were standing out across the nation from rivals. And they talked about how Woods was actually going through a little bit of a position change. So naturally, he has been that edge defender, somebody that's purely just resetting the line of scrimmage, attacking the quarterback. But now they're coaching him to be that free range roaming linebacker. And in 7-on-7, it's already become a natural fit as far as the feedback goes. So Jaden Woods, even though he hasn't played a lot of linebacker in his high school career, is already adjusting very well. And I know it's not full pads and helmets and everything. This is 7-on-7. It's passing league. I get it. But for somebody that's played mostly around the line of scrimmage, and then he moves back to that linebacker position and he's excelling in 7-on-7 with his first taste of this new linebacker spot. Again, Penn State just Deion Barnes and everybody that's working together defensively to get these recruits from all across the country. They are doing everything right to be able to just get prospects that, yeah, they can play defensive end, or they can be in line to wear the next one to wear number 11.
Yeah, if you get them on campus, you'll figure it out. The kids have to earn it once they go to Penn State, and that's they get
there's
the
only
numbers.
one number 11.
Yeah, that's what I mean. To wear that, you've got to already have proven that you're a bad man. So I'm curious which guy is next, but this group. I mean, if you follow Penn State close as anybody. Name a class that's had this many guys in that 6'2" to 6'4" range, 220-ish to 240 that can really move. Penn State's kind of like, we're just going to take the whole bag here, and whoever comes out of it. I think it's brilliant because this is something that Paterno's teams used to do. They used to take a lot of linebackers, and sometimes they moved to other spots. Sometimes it's tight end, sometimes it's fullback, sometimes it's edge, whatever, but they're getting good football players. Now, there's some development here. This isn't an elite class because there's still questions on some of these guys, how big they're going to get and all that. But the frames are what you're looking at. And Penn State's had success with, especially on defense. It's kind of hard to argue with the success they've had. So why would you change? And they're not. I love what they're doing.
Penn State's done everything right defensively, and that's because of the staff. And like you said, development is key here. And you have good coaches to do that. Tom Allen, Deion Barnes, and this extends back to the secondary. Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter, right? These are some of the best position coaches in all of the country. Forget recruiting for just a moment. Then it becomes developing, and these are the right guys to do it. So yes, Deion Barnes was key, and it's kind of strange, right? Deion Barnes is the primary recruiter for a Max Granville, who again, Locked On Oklahoma, Locked On Sooners host, John said that he compares him to Micah Parsons, or at least has elements of his skill set that relate back to Micah Parsons, right? They all fit in the same category where they can just be disruptive at the line of scrimmage or allow them to be that true number 11, LeVar Arrington, Navarro Bowman, Abdul Carter, the next extension of it. And like you said, they've just recruited about 4 or 5 of them. And honestly, this is something we haven't seen in a recent Penn State class. There's been the Micah Parsons. There's been the Abdul Carter where it's like, he's the guy. But now you have 4 or 5 players in this class alone that could vie for the number 11 jersey.
That's why I'm a little more confident long-term this will work out. I mean, I know this is not necessarily what Penn State is projecting, but I mean, guys come in at 230 and end up being 290. Woods could end up being a 3-tech in it as a senior. You never know. Mm-hmm. Guys change their bodies. But they've got enough guys that somebody's going to be the edge, somebody's going to be a backer, somebody might be a strong side edge. It'll fill itself out in time, and you just got so many options. Even if a guy gets in trouble or has an injury, you have other options. They have covered their bases. It's really, really smart.
Exactly. The odds are in their favor to land somebody, and multiple players will certainly pan out. I'm not here to say that all 5 of them are going to be superstars, or all 5 of them are going to be underwhelming and Penn State really should have tried to find somebody else in this class. No, you have players that have the superstar potential to them, and it's a matter of being able to develop that as well. So defensively, this is a really good class. Offensively, obviously has the question marks with wide receiver. You only have Beckham Kritza, but you start at quarterback, but you start 2026 off on a great foot with a top 10 quarterback and a top 10 running back in Troy Hune and Messiah Mickens. They are both going to be back for the 2024 Lasch Bash barbecue this weekend. Who are some of the other names you need to know? Some of them are on campus. Some of them are missing and maybe could be added to this list. We'll tell you about all the names you need to know for next year's cycle coming up next. The Lasch Bash is always something that's going to look out towards the next cycle. So this is a focus on 2026, 2027. And there are a lot of big names that Penn State is already in good standing with. And I know at least wide receiver, we've said that quite a bit, Brian, that, hey, Penn State's leading for their recruitment or they're in the mix and somehow they fall out of it. But Troy Hune and Messiah Mickens, and we've already had a conversation about this, how this class of 2026 could be epic, could be legendary. I mean, seriously, they could finish, if everything goes well, you could finish in the top 5. You're already in a good place to at least finish in the top 10 because you have your quarterback and your running back taken care of. In this age of college football, where it's about offense, 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 and dynamic playmakers, you have a quality quarterback and a quality running back to start. And then the dominoes will fall. So those players, those other prospects that are intrigued by Penn State will follow the guys who have set the example by committing early in Troy Hune and Messiah Mickens. There are a lot of names to like on this list, Brian, that are attending the Lasch Bash for 2024, the 2026 prospects, tons of them. I would focus on the offensive line here because there are really good offensive line prospects in the state of Pennsylvania, particularly. The other name to know above all else and is going to be recruited nationally here is Kevin Brown, offensive tackle out of the Harrisburg area. Penn State, if they can land him, is comparable to Cooper Cousins in the sense of he is another headline prospect that will be able to be a player recruiter as well and help fill out the class of 2026, in addition to what you have in Hune and Mickens already.
Yeah, if you get the big offensive lineman early, and Pennsylvania's always been good state for O-line, yes, that would be important. You got your QB, offensive tackles and quarterbacks commit the earliest, historically speaking. If you can get the kid that's an hour and a half from your campus, that's a national recruit, that would probably be a very, very good thing. Brown is a kid that is a national top 100 player by 24/7, et cetera. The way he's built for as big as he is, 270, 280, he's had to have been a wrestler or something. He's genetically gifted. He's going to be an early contributor. That would be a great start to Penn State's class.
Now, there is one player that is absent. It's still to be determined, but it's another offensive lineman and arguably the best offensive lineman in the country. He's a 5-star according to Rivals, and that's Emmanuel Ihenacho. Out of the DC area, Ihenacho is probably very comparable to Olu Fashanu, but his skills are refined now, whereas Fashanu took some time to build up and become that first-round prospect at offensive tackle. Ihenacho is that good right now. So Penn State would have Troy Hune, Messiah Mickens. Kevin Brown seems a little more likely because Ihenacho, again, out of the DC area and has been recruited for a long time by other schools in the SEC, the ever-changing Big 12 ACC, right? He's been recruited all across the country. And Kevin Brown's the same case, but Penn State got to Ihenacho early. They started recruiting him very early and have been in the mix for a long time. He's visited Penn State a lot. If you look at On3's recruiting machine, they have him at least in the Penn State in the lead for Ihenacho. He's absent from this list. That could change, but that's an important attendee, especially or would be attendee. And it's I don't want to say it's concerning, but yeah, you want to get him on campus for the Lasch Bash here.
I was starting my 26 profiles nationally yesterday. He was like the second kid that I did. And I don't remember a kid with this much power and this quick feet. I mean, he's 350-ish as a sophomore high school. I mean, he is just massive. He looks like he's 25 years old. It's insane. Like, you just look at his body. I don't remember what his face looks like, but the body and the way he carries himself, like it carries it. I know it's going to sound weird, naturally. Like, this is a day one starter at a major program.
Anywhere.
He's been coached, whatever. He's an elite player. And he goes to Georgetown Prep in DC. It's a good high school. He'll be fine where he goes academically. I don't know how many guys you're going to be able to find like this. There were plays he physically took kids off their feet with one hand to their chest. I mean, look, my dead grandmother can coach that. So there's a lot of things to look at. His recruitment will be wild, I'm sure, because like the Georgias and the Bamas and the LSUs are going to come for this kid.
Yes.
So I'm curious to see what places he visits between now and the end of the season. I'm sure he'll come to Penn State's campus because it's so close. But does he go to Ohio State? Does he go to SC or Oregon or anything like that? How much does NIL play into it? But that's an elite player. He may be the best player in the country for the class of 26.
Ihenacho, like as you mentioned, he's close. I think he's officially listed at 6'7", 340 pounds. And this is someone that is 15, 16 years old, entering his junior season of high school. Yeah. So he could start anywhere, Georgia, Alabama, obviously Penn State, but I want to name the other schools that crank out offensive and defensive line talent where you have to kind of wait where you kind of have to wait your turn. And he would start at left tackle for Georgia and probably in a year.
Yeah, at the worst, he'd start at Georgia as a sophomore. If you did learn the playbook or something. Won't be a physical problem. Yeah. Like he fits them to a T. Like Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, anywhere he would come in and play very, very early.
Some other names that I think are important to keep an eye on. Jashir Rogers out of the state of Delaware. Dazier Carter, wide receiver out of the state of Virginia. Deron Harris out of the state of Pennsylvania. So these are players to just continue to... These are players to continue to watch for as they are choosing to spend their weekend. A lot of other Florida's having a barbecue, right? Michigan's having a barbecue, as we've already discussed. These select players that are within the region have chosen to go to Penn State as opposed to another campus for another school's middle of the summer barbecue before things really ramp back up here with the football season.
J.C. Anderson's a tight end out of Illinois that's coming. He's really good. Connor Salmon, a wide receiver out of Virginia. He's a 10-4 100-meter kid. He's going to Penn State. I'm sure Penn State likes hearing that because he's a receiver. Yeah. The Carter kid you mentioned is really, really good. He's an all-around player. But there are some in-state kids that aren't visiting. Tyler Merrill, one of the best players in the state in offensive
Another offensive lineman, yep.
Joey O'Brien, kid from LaSalle in Pittsburgh, maybe the best corner in the East. He's going to Notre Dame that weekend. And the kid that I was really surprised, Cameron Brickle out of Malvern Prep. I don't know where he's going, but he's a national recruit. He's a D tackle. Penn State cannot miss out on the big-time in-state D tackle. That's a name we'll probably be following. I don't know where he's visiting, but it's not Penn State, I don't think, this weekend.
And that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, you have the good news with which commits or which prospects are visiting for the Lasch Bash, but there are some very strong names that are absent from this list as well. Ones that are going elsewhere, but also some others that are to be determined. And that is a big deal because that kind of shows, is Penn State the top priority or are they on the outside looking in? That's Brian Smith over on the other side, Locked On's recruiting expert. All of his socials and platforms will be linked down in the description. I encourage you to check them out. Brian, thanks once again for helping me talk about Penn State recruiting for not only the class of 2025 cycle, but 26 and beyond.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thanks so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Be a part of the discussion down in the comments. What do you think of this class of 2025? Do you think they'll be able to land another one or two wide receiver commits? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please like this episode, share it with friends and family. And if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.